I really think there's more to this.
So the first question I have is that the state's going to be reopening once again in May, per Governor Lamont. Now, as far as what numbers you see, and I know you can't give obviously patient information out, but as a physician, how do you feel about the state reopening and lowering the guidelines in towards middle of May?
Well, I think we have, a couple of things in our favor. I think there has been a fairly good response, at least from my end of it. Looking at my patient population, a lot of people who have been able to get the vaccine have gotten the vaccination, and I think that's good. There was a bump in cases in Eastern Connecticut after we had done well at the beginning of the pandemic. We did have a little bit of a surge, if you will. February, the hospital was quite full, and there was concerns about what was going on. And at one point, I think Griswold was one of the hot spots in the state. As bad as that was, it did provide with some more community immunity. Those people who didn't get very sick wound up, getting through it. And I'd seen a few patients in my office who had gotten sick with corona, tested positive, and ultimately recovered. So I think we're approaching perhaps something like herd immunity because of that. And then, the weather gets better, people get outside. And so I think that there'll be, hopefully that'll help keep the cases down. The concerns are going to be, and we've seen that in other states that have already opened up, that you're going to get a little bit of a bump up in cases. So I think we're pretty good in a pretty good position right now to do that. I think the more people get vaccinated, the better. I was on a call with a hospital, Hartford Healthcare, system-wide evaluation of all the patients they had in the hospital with COVID a few weeks ago. And, two concerns were, these were people who were pretty sick, and they were younger than the population that had been sick earlier, but none of the people who were in the hospital had been vaccinated. So that seems to be something that is somewhat protective. So if that trend continues and people who can get vaccinated, I think we'll do okay.
At the beginning of the pandemic, the age demographic that was affected the most was 80 to 89, or even one was 70 to 89, 70 to 79, and 80 to 89. Both those demographics. When we hit that second wave, it seemed more to be 20 to 30, 30 to 40 that seemed to spike. What do you feel is the reason for that? That the demographics basically flip flop.
Well, I think there was a lot of nursing homes got hit pretty quick, at the beginning, and you're talking about a population of individuals who are already compromised, if for their age, if nothing else, but they often have other comorbidities. So, and they're in a building that they can't get out of. So the virus does spread fairly rapidly in those kinds of settings, and it was not surprising that that population of people suffered the largest infection rate, if you will, at that time. I think the other thing, as far as the second surge, there's a misapprehension about the fact that most people who get infected will not necessarily go on to develop significant disease. That doesn't mean they're not spreading it. So you have a population of individuals who, because of their age, believe that they're more or less immune from getting sick. That may be true for a certain amount of them, but that's not true for all of them. And if they're getting together, and I'd heard there were some parties going on and people were getting together, that you're going to get sickness. And so the number of people involved is, that get ill is a smaller percentage of the people who are involved in those events. And I think that may have been driving a little bit of that they thought that they were relatively free of concern. And so consequently, they were being a little bit more free and easy with getting together with their friends and so forth and so forth. So, we did see that in the high school. There was small little outbreaks that occurred because people were having, get-togethers off campus, and thought that would be fine. And, probably for the most of the time it was, but it just takes a few little events, if you will, to cause a small little bump. So, it's a byproduct, I think, of the way this disease is, that it doesn't affect everyone in a severe way. Most of us don't get sick very badly, but if you do, you can wind up in a very bad state. So I think that had something to do with it. I think we were lucky at the beginning because the casinos closed, and that brought a lot of the outside people coming into this area down significantly, and that lowered our risks. And I think at the beginning of this process, the people in this community were fairly diligent about keeping themselves safe with the masking, and we all tend to live far enough apart that coming in close contact with individuals that we're not closely related to is not easy to do. So
right now, per the state of Connecticut, there's just under 1.2 million people that are fully vaccinated from COVID-19. Now, speaking to one of the points you just made about maybe some of the younger generation getting out a little more and being a little more, say, footloose and fancy free with it, feeling a little more comfortable with everything. Do you think that maybe that this, with the weather getting warmer now, and even more age groups, getting cabin fever, or so they just got to get out? Do you think that we're in a risk for another wave?
I do. I mean, I think we have to be diligent about how we comport ourselves in social settings where we're not, confined to our little pod of people that we're always with. There's going to be cases. I mean, until this thing is completely eradicated, which I don't know how we're going to get to that, but there will always be a small burden of disease in the community, and
it's never going to go away. It's a virus. Is that correct?
Well, I think it will eventually burn itself out. I mean, the concern is that And I just read some stuff about India this morning, which is terrifying. I mean, we don't, just because you don't get sick, all right, you get the virus, you go, I don't get sick, I didn't get sick. That doesn't mean the virus isn't reproducing inside of you.
Right.
And every time the virus reproduces, there's a chance for it to have a mutation. And then the variant that comes out might be more infectious, might be more deadly. So the one thing that vaccination does prevent, it does prevent that occurring. If we can get everyone vaccinated, then there'll be no active disease, there'll be no active reproduction of virus. And therefore there won't be these variants. These variants are the things that are really concerning now. You could be vaccinated and be fine, but then something comes out that is not going to be affected by that vaccine, and then we're back to square one again. I think there's always been that concern that the more success you have in mitigating disease, the more likely people are going to say, well, it wasn't really a big deal to begin with. Nothing happened. Why did we quarantine for 6 months when nothing happened? Well, that's because you quarantined for 6 months. That means nothing happened, and nothing terrible happened. You don't see the variants that come out that are completely immune to any kind of vaccine, and we're back in February 2020 again. So I think there has to be a continued sense of diligence with mask wearing. I think that's something that may not go away for a while. I know some people consider it to be, an infringement on liberty, but I think there is a certain minimal thing we can do if it means protecting people, and even that means protecting the most vulnerable people. Wearing a mask does prevent transmission. I've seen it in my own office. I was exposed to someone with active virus who didn't tell us till after he got into the office that he'd gone for a COVID test. I had not been vaccinated at that point, but we kept our distance. We kept our masks on. I washed my hands right after they left, and I never got sick. So it is effective. It can be helpful in preventing transmission, and even if, like I said, even if you're an asymptomatic patient, it doesn't mean you don't have the risk of having a mutation occur while you're incubating that thing. So, I think over time, these things tend to just kind of peter out as there is more and more herd immunity. And at that point, we will probably be hopefully free of the largest burden of disease.
Has the dog been vaccinated?
No, the dog has not been vaccinated, but my wife might be just getting home. So, I don't know. It's a book that's still being written, Mike. You don't know how it's going to end, and I think we're moving in the right direction. I just, I am concerned that there are lots of people who are, don't have a good, firm understanding of what we're talking about here. And I have a friend who's, he's on the righter end of the spectrum as far as politics is concerned. He was a very dubious proponent of mask wearing and all of that. But then his son's wife got pregnant, and they made a vaccination a prerequisite to seeing the babies. And so he went out and got vaccinated and then posted it on his Facebook page. And the stuff that was thrown at him by his former, friends, I had never even, heard of these things, these concerns, these theories, these pseudoscientific ideas that were being thrown around. So, I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of bad information. And I think those things are going to prevent people from getting vaccinated, and that's going to be a problem. I think that persistent vaccination resistance is going to be something that is going to take some time to kind of get through.
When it comes to getting vaccinated, there are, you just talked about it, there's so many different sects. SECS, or different trains of thought. And one's going to affect the other. Next thing you know, you have groups. of people here and groups of people there, and with very differing opinions. This has not become just a medical emergency. It's become quite the social emergency as well, because it's pitting literally family members against family members. I know of families that won't talk to other portions of their family because somebody got vaccinated, somebody didn't get vaccinated.
I don't know. It's an astounding circumstance. I was thinking about this interview this morning, and I was, we haven't had a national challenge of this magnitude since 9/11 occurred before Facebook, before the internet was as ubiquitous as it is, before there was this machine, conspiracy theory generating machine in everybody's living room. Even then, though, we had 9/11 truthers and the movie Loose Change about how the whole thing was an inside job. That's only just metastasized now, and you've got these people having concerns, then going online and getting those concerns validated, and then coming back and thinking that this is a reality that is a valid thing, and they're getting more and more bizarre and more out of left field. And it's just, it gets to the point as a person who's trying to give people good information, I can't refute these things anymore. They're so bizarre and so out of left field. There's no way to say, bring these people back because they're talking about things, and then they'll say, well, you're just in on it. You're just compromised because you're part of the medical industrial complex, and blah blah blah. And it's like that. It's pointless at that point.
Well,
I can only tell you.
I was just going to say there are people that still believe that Donald Trump is still in office.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And this is like I said, it's become a complete social issue as well. We're still going to drain the swamp, and there's no swamp.
I don't. Well, there's a concept in medicine called delusion. A delusion is a fixed belief that is unassailable. And the gentleman I was referring to before, he was convinced that Barack Obama was born in Kenya. And I was like, well, he has the birth certificate isn't valid. I said, but it is valid. It's, there was a birth announcement in the newspaper in Hawaii a week after he was born. Well, that was fake. That was, there's no amount of evidence that is ever going to be sufficient enough to change their minds. Whatever you come up with, and that's a delusion, and there's no way you can change a person's thinking if they've gone down the rabbit hole into delusional thinking. And I think that's to the detriment of our society as a whole. And we'll see. Again, we're going to see what happens. This pandemic is there's going to be before the pandemic and after the pandemic. That's how your life is going to be. Well, before the pandemic, the radio station was doing really great. We had all kinds it was moving in the right direction. And then the pandemic hit, and I had to go back to square one and start all over again. My practice took a hit with the pandemic, and things changed after the pandemic that, we're still dealing with at this point. So it's going to be one of those watershed moments in our lives. And I think it's going to be a watershed moment in the country's life because, things are going to change that things have already changed, and we're not going to necessarily go back to what they were.
Well, it's almost kind of like 9/11. That was those moments that changed the entire country.
Yeah.
But
9/11 happened in a day. This has happened over a year. So
but the effects of 9/11 are still happening today. They're building,
absolutely.
Middle school kids are building monuments. They weren't even alive when 9/11 happened, but they're still affected to the point they wanted to raise $7,000, $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 for this monument to make sure that it was erected on the school grounds, and they weren't even in existence.
Somebody they read about in history books, right?
And as well as they'll read about this in history books as well. All right, so we are talking to Dr. Mark Deponte, who has a practice in Lisbon, Connecticut. And, I have a question about the uh, the vaccines themselves.
Mhm.
So, okay, you can go down that rabbit hole with this too, but we're not going to go that. Well, I do want to ask you one question about it, but there's three licensed vaccinations in Connecticut. There's Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson and Johnson. Now, Johnson and Johnson was kind of scaled back, or I don't even know if it was taken out altogether.
I think it's being reevaluated.
Okay,
They
so
may come back today with it being just reinstated.
So what I tell me if I'm wrong, and please fill me in, is that from what I understand is that they took it back because of blood clotting issues. I don't know.
Yeah,
if
there
there's
were.
more, but there's
Wow.
a ton of different medications, birth control being one, that will actually cause blood clotting as well. So what was the reasoning with pulling back of Johnson and Johnson?
I don't know. I think it was. They said it was out of an overabundance of caution. You're right. Birth control pills, lots of different medications have this kind of a side effect, and it's literally 1 in a million. So 6 million doses were administered, and six people, 6 or 7 people got the and I don't know if one person passed away. Anyway, and so with that kind of those kind of numbers, it's even hard to ascribe the shot to causing those blood clots in every case. But I think they just wanted to be safe. I think if we only had the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, if that was the only option, they probably would not have called it off, pulled it. But since you have 2 other vaccines which are as more effective, as effective, safe, there doesn't seem to be the same kind of problems. They felt that they didn't have to keep it on the shelves if they didn't. They had an option of reevaluating its effectiveness, and I think that makes sense. They've had the same concerns with the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe. That's why that one is not in Europe. Yeah,
Europe, yeah.
Yeah, and the United States hasn't approved it yet. I think for the same concerns. So,
fact or fiction? People under the age of 18 have to have Pfizer.
I have not heard that.
I've heard that on a few occasions. That's why I asked.
I don't think that there's any significant.
I don't know if I believe it or not, but
I haven't heard that there was a significant difference in the way that those 2 vaccines work. I can tell you that I got a call from the hospital one day late last year that we're going to be doing the vaccine. Come on down. You don't need an appointment. So I went over and I walked in and they said, I said, what are you giving me? They said, Moderna. All right. And so it's been that way for most people. Now, I don't know if Pfizer has gotten specific approval for people in that age group and Moderna hasn't. That may be the difference. But as far as I can tell, there's no significant difference in the mode of operation or the mechanism of operation of either vaccine. They're both mRNA vaccines. So they should work essentially the same.
Are there nanobots in the vaccine to continue with the narrative of transhumanism?
No, there are no nanobots in the vaccine.
Connecticut is showing, as of yesterday, 8,039 deaths, up 12 from the previous day. Are these COVID-19 deaths or COVID-19 associated deaths due to comorbidity?
What was this? What was this statistic you quoted? I didn't quite catch the whole thing.
The total amount of deaths reported by the state of Connecticut right now is 8,039, up 12 over the previous day.
Of these are attributed to COVID by the state of Connecticut.
Right. So
Okay.
what? Yeah,
I know what you're asking. Are these all COVID deaths, even though they say they're COVID deaths?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes. I mean, if
you stuttered there a little bit. So
well, I mean, there's there's a couple of different. The question is a little loaded because there's the oh, if you get hit by a car, but you on the way home from getting swabbed and found that you got COVID, they're going to say you died of COVID, or the idea that you died with COVID, but something else killed you. And that doctors get paid more money to code people as COVID deaths.
These are all
So,
things that are.
yes, I've heard them all. I think that in order for someone so COVID infections have a variety of manifestations. Not everyone even gets sick. And some people it's all upper respiratory and they think they have sinusitis. We had a case in my office. One of my office workers needed to get checked, was having surgery. She went to get swabbed preoperatively and it came back positive. She had no symptoms at all. She said she had a mild headache. She thought it was a sinus problem. So the people who wind up getting admitted to the hospital with COVID, those people, if they go on to die, are dying of COVID because they've been on a ventilator. They've had significant illness, and they're obviously having the pulmonary manifestations. Their lungs are filling up and they just can't breathe anymore. That's a typical COVID presentation mortality. There are other manifestations of it, vascular problems and so forth and so forth. And I think that if they're infected and ill with COVID and then subsequently die of a heart attack, can you say that they died of COVID? I think to the exclusion of all other problems, yes, they would not have died had they not become infected with COVID. So I think yes. Are there a little bit of soft on the edge of things? Probably, But I think most of those numbers, if 99% of those numbers are valid, when it comes down to it. And I think of all, states have been fast and loose with the numbers in some cases. But I think Connecticut has been fairly rigorous when it comes to describing and ascribing a cause of death to people who have, succumbed to coronavirus.
I want to jump back into mask wearing for a minute now. Apparently, I guess the mandate on wearing them on the outside is going to be lifted as of the middle of May. Is it May 19th? Is that the date?
I think so.
Yeah, give or take a day or so.
Mm-hmm.
What do you how do you feel about the whole mask shaming type of issue?
I don't understand it. I really don't. I think that this is another example of this becoming a cultural thing as opposed to just a medical thing or a social thing. I mean, and we had this conversation a year ago, Michael. Remember we talked about this at the beginning, and I said, you have to remember, I'm wearing a mask to protect you, and you're wearing a mask to protect me. That's why we wear the masks. We don't wear the masks to protect ourselves. We're protecting other people with it. And so the idea that you would not wear a mask just as a common courtesy, just to be a good person, a citizen,
Right.
is crazy to me. And this became a thing, and I don't know that I've seen a lot of it in Connecticut. I've heard about it in other states, other parts of the country. But I wear a mask. If I'm in a store, anytime I'm inside of a building, I wear a mask. In my office, I wear a mask. Even though I've been vaccinated and many of my patients have been vaccinated, and we technically, according to the CDC, don't have to wear masks if we're in the same room anymore. I continue to put it on, and because it's just like I said, it's a common courtesy to prevent this needless spread of a disease, which can be fatal. Not always, but it can be.
Last question that I have, really, it's a pretty simple one, I would think. At least on the surface, it is simple. Are we starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, no, I think we are. You can tell, your business is coming back. I mean, there were some concerns at the beginning of this that we're going to shut down the state, and I tried to reiterate to people whenever I could that if you wear a mask, wash your hands, keep yourself a little bit distant from the people around you, we can do 80% of what we were doing prior to this. I think with the acquisition of immunity from vaccinations, as well as community acquisition, if you will, we will have an opportunity to come back to some semblance of the pre-pandemic lifestyle that we enjoy. It may not be exactly the same, and it may never be exactly the same, but it'll be close to it. It'll be different, maybe, probably, maybe even better. One of the side effects of this whole thing is we've had no flu. Influenza has disappeared. So, and that's not like, well, they're just not testing. They are testing. Every time you go to the hospital now and they test you, they're doing a test for COVID and the influenza virus. And they say they haven't picked up a single case of flu. So, there is something to be said for what we've been doing to mitigate the spread of this disease. And who's to say it won't change things for going forward? So I think we're getting there. I think the middle of the summer will be almost back to normal, barring any catastrophes with new variants that are, markedly different than what we've been dealing with. So hopefully we won't have to deal with that.
Yeah, it looks like the variants that they're concerned with. There's one in the UK, South Africa.
That one is here now. That one is the predominant strain in the United States is the UK variant now. But the thing that worries me is India. That's terrifying. They had 300,000 cases yesterday.
How many?
300,000. One day.
That's nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity, Mike. It's always good to talk to you, and look forward to talking to you again in the future. And I hope you heavily edit this thing to make us both look good.
Yep, it's going right as.
Oh.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mark Deponte. Appreciate your time and letting us know really what your views are, and I'm sure it's been a lot of help to a lot of people.
I hope so. So get your shots, everybody.